Some creatures dwell deep in the shadowed silence of the forest, moving between the trunks as if the trees themselves part to let them pass. Others glide beneath the dark mirror of the water, where sunlight barely reaches and the world above is only a shifting dream. A few inhabit the thin, dim places at the edge of the mind, where waking and sleep mingle, and the line between the real and the imagined dissolves like mist. They have never been trapped in nets nor sealed in cages, and yet they have never truly left us. They linger in stories told by the fire, in warnings whispered to children, in the shapes we think we see at twilight. They are the companions of our oldest fears and our quietest wonders, creatures of half memory and full imagination. Tonight we will walk softly in their company, following their faint and ancient tracks through the landscapes of history and myth as gently and unshakably as the moon follows the patient tide. To understand the Qalupalik in its fullest form, one must look beyond the simple description of a green-skinned, ice-haunting figure. The Qalupalik is not merely a tale of a creature. It is a reflection of human relationship with an environment that demands respect, caution, and constant awareness. The Arctic, with its shifting seas and fragile ice, is a place where a single step can mean the difference between safety and disaster. In that sense, the Qalupalik is less a monster and more a guardian of boundaries. Its hum, that strange, low vibration, becomes a kind of metaphor for the background hum of the Arctic itself, the crack of distant ice floes, the muffled thunder of shifting pack ice, the soft roar of wind across snowfields. These are sounds that shape a person's sense of place. In the telling of the Qalupalik story, those sounds are drawn together into a single image, a figure beneath the ice, both alien and familiar, whose purpose is to draw one away from safety so that the boundary between life and death becomes visible. In modern interpretations, the Qalupalik has shifted yet again. Some storytellers present it not as a predator at all, but as a lonely figure, a being exiled to the cold depths, longing for companionship. Its taking of children is, in this gentler telling, an attempt to bring them into its underwater world where it is no longer alone. This interpretation turns the Qalupalik into a kind of misunderstood figure, one who exists outside the warmth of the community and therefore reaches for what it cannot have. Such reinterpretations are not unusual. As stories travel into new times and audiences, their meanings adapt. In communities where the immediate dangers of sea ice are no longer part of daily life, the Qalupalik becomes a symbol of more abstract boundaries, the edge of childhood, the crossing into unknown experiences, the lure of leaving safety behind for something mysterious but untested. This, perhaps, is why the Qalupalik resonates beyond its Arctic home. In every culture, there are tales of the edge, places where the known gives way to the unknown, and where something waits. Sometimes that something is a monster, sometimes a spirit, sometimes merely an idea, but always it is a reminder that not all steps should be taken in a broader sense. The Qalupalik reflects the human tendency to give shape to danger. The sea, the ice, and the cold are vast impersonal forces. They do not care, do not aim, do not choose. By imagining a Qalupalik beneath the water, those forces are given a face, a voice, and an intent, something that can be feared in a personal way and therefore respected. This is a survival mechanism as much as it is a storytelling one. It is also worth noting that in Inuit culture, stories are rarely told simply to frighten. They are woven into a way of living where respect for the environment is essential. The Qalupalik is not a ghost to be banished or a beast to be hunted. It is a reminder to keep the lines between safety and danger clearly marked. It is a living part of the social fabric, a thread that runs through generations of storytellers, each adding their own small variations. Today, artists, authors, and filmmakers sometimes bring the Qalupalik into new mediums, illustrated children's books where its green face is softened, documentaries where elders speak of it in the calm tones of tradition, even short films where its hum becomes a haunting musical note. And yet, in all these retellings, one element persists, the stillness of the moment before a choice is made. Perhaps that is the true power of the Qalupalik. It exists not in the water or in the ice, but in that silent hesitation, the pause, in a child's step, the breath held between curiosity and caution. The moment hangs, fragile as a frozen bubble, and in it lives the entire weight of the story. Whether the listener is on the shore of an Arctic bay or sitting in a warm apartment far to the south, that moment is the same dot, and so the Qalupalik drifts onward as it always has, beneath the shifting ice and through the currents of human imagination. It waits not for a specific child, but for the timeless human urge to see what lies beyond the safe edge. In that sense, it will never vanish. The Qalupalik is not a creature that charges from the depths in a storm of violence. No, it is slower, quieter. Its power lies in patience. Inuit storytellers say it moves just beneath the ice, pressing its pale green hands against the underside, drifting close to the shore where the water thins and light filters through in fractured, shifting beams. It waits the way the cold waits for the unwary. Its hum, low, resonant, and strange, is said to seep upward through the frozen surface. It is not a cry of hunger. It is not even, some say, a sound meant for human ears. It is simply what it does, a song of the deep, steady, and unbroken, the kind of sound you might not notice at first, but children with their untrained ears might pause and turn their heads toward it. That pause is all the Qalupalik needs. The elders say its movements are deliberate. It will drift closer, the dark ribbon of its hair streaming behind it, the curved hood of its amayuti opening like a shadowed mouth. Sometimes it is said to tap gently against the ice, the sound muffled and strange, as though knocking from another world. This is not to break through. It is to tempt, to make the curious step closer. Here the symbolism becomes clear. The Qalupalik is not merely a monster lurking for prey. It is the embodiment of a lure, a caution, against being drawn away from safety by things unknown. In this way, it is as much a reflection of the human mind as it is a warning about the sea. Just as the ice can look solid until the moment it gives way, so too can the world seem harmless until danger quietly rises beneath it. Inuit traditions weave their creatures into the land and seascape so seamlessly that you cannot easily pull one apart from the other. The Qalupalik is no exception. Some say it is as much a part of the water as the currents themselves. It does not rage against the ice. It uses it. In that sense, it mirrors the survival strategy of the people who told its story, using what is present, bending the harshness of the environment into a means of life. Over the centuries, variations of the Qalupalik tale have drifted across Arctic communities like pack ice, shifting in shape but not in essence. In one place, the Qalupalik's skin is said to be not green, but a pale, icy blue, its surface smooth and cold as newly formed ice. In another, it wears not a traditional amayuti, but a kind of woven net, tangled with shells and bone, which rattles softly as it moves. In yet another version, it is less human in form and more seal-like, its limbs blending into the curves of the ocean's life. But across all versions, one detail remains. It takes children, not in a violent snatch, but in a smooth, almost tender sweep, as though gathering something precious. This quietness in the act is what makes the story linger. It is not a warning of force. It is a warning of subtlety, to listen to these stories. And their proper setting is to feel their weight. Imagine sitting in a snow house in midwinter, the outside wind pressing against the walls with a slow, constant sigh. The only light is the glow of a seal oil lamp, its flame small but unwavering. The air smells of smoke and fur and the faint salt of dried fish. The storyteller speaks without drama. There is no need for raised voices or sudden gasps. The rhythm is steady, like a sled pulled over packed snow. The Qalupalik is described as though it were an everyday fact, no more remarkable than the tide or the cold. This is the beauty of Inuit oral tradition. The fantastic and the practical merge until they are one. In this light, the Qalupalik is not just a myth. It is an invisible part of the geography. To live near the sea ice is to live with the Qalupalik, whether one believes in it or not. It inhabits the mind's map of the world, marking the edges, where one must be careful. Even the act of telling the story has its own symbolic weight. The very moment the tale is spoken aloud, it becomes another layer of ice between the listener and danger, a thin, invisible sheet of caution laid over their future steps. And when a child hears that hum in the dark, real or imagined, they will think of the green face beneath the water and turn back toward the warmth of the hearth. It is here, in this weaving of fear and care, that the Qalupalik truly lives. Not in the depths, not even in the icy water, but in the space between curiosity and safety. In the moment before a footstep is taken. In the next segment, we will drift further still into the deeper waters of interpretation, exploring what the Qalupalik means beyond the Arctic, and how it reflects a universal thread in human storytelling, the blending of warning, wonder, and the thin ice of the unknown. Far in the north, where the winter night stretches for months and the sea is a frozen plain of silence, stories travel differently. They do not rush like the quick, bright tailies of warmer lands. They drift, slow as drifting ice, spoken in the steady voice of someone who has learned to wait out the long dark. It is in this still and snow-wrapped world that we find the Qalupalik, a figure from Inuit folklore, a being whose name carries the weight of generations of warnings. The Qalupalik belongs to the Arctic, to the small, tightly bound communities that have always lived along its coasts. These were not villages that came and went with the seasons. They were places of endurance, where people learned to read the subtle changes in the wind and to measure a life not in years, but in the turning of sea ice and the migration of seals. The Qalupalik, they say, lives beneath those waters, in the cold black depths just past the edge of the sea ice, where the land falls away into a silence that is more than human ears can bear. Inuit elders describe the Qalupalik as neither fully human nor wholly of the sea. Its skin, they say, is the pale green of submerged kelp, stretched tight over long, thin limbs. Its hair flows in the water like dark ribbons, sometimes tangled with strands of seaweed. Most haunting of all is its amayuti, the traditional Inuit carrying pouch worn on the back, in which it gathers the children it has taken. In this detail alone, the Qalupalik is bound to the rhythms of the human world, for the amayuti is not just a garment. It is a symbol of care, of the close and constant presence of a child's heartbeat against a mother's back. In the Qalupalik's hands, that tenderness becomes something else, a vessel for loss. The earliest whispers of this story cannot be traced to a single date. Folklore in the Arctic has no birth certificate. It emerges from necessity, shaped by the lives of those who tell it. And necessity in this case was simple. The sea is dangerous. For the Inuit, the coastline was both lifeline and hazard. The ocean fed the people, seals, fish, whales, but it also took lives suddenly without warning. A child wandering too close to a tide crack, a sudden shift of ice underfoot, and the water could claim them before anyone saw. And so a figure like the Qalupalik was born, not in the written pages of a book, but in the steady, matter-of-fact voice of a parent, warning a child not to stray too close to the shore. Over time, the Qalupalik's place in oral tradition deepened. It became more than a cautionary tale. It became a rhythm in the fabric of Arctic life. The creak of the sea ice could be the sound of its slow swimming beneath. The sudden dark shadow under clear ice could be its passing form. The low hum some claimed to hear at night, a sound like a deep, watery breathing, was said to be the Qalupalik calling out. These details were not delivered as frightful embellishments to scare for entertainment's sake. In Inuit storytelling, the line between the real and the imagined is not a sharp one. The story is a tool, not to fool the listener, but to shape the way they move through the world. For a child, the Qalupalik's green face beneath the ice was a far clearer message than an abstract lecture on safety. It was a shape to keep in mind, a shadow to avoid, a reason to hold the hand of one's parent just a little tighter when walking near the frozen edge. And so the Qalupalik survived century after century, unbroken by the changes that came to the Arctic. Even when whaling ships arrived with their heavy masts and foreign voices, even when missionaries brought new faiths and governments brought new laws, the Qalupalik remained in the quiet talk of homes lit by seal oil lamps. The creature did not require belief to persist. It only needed to be told over and over, in the dim warmth of a snow house, or later, in the wooden frame of a settlement home where the wind still clawed at the walls. This first look at the Qalupalik is like looking across the frozen bay in early spring, seeing only the white surface and the faint shapes beneath. In time, as we move deeper into the story, we will see more. The way this figure moves, the role it plays beyond fear, and how it reflects the delicate balance between human life and the cold, watchful sea. But for now, we stand at the edge of the ice, listening for a sound, the faint, low hum that might be nothing more than the wind, or might be the call of something ancient, green-skinned, and waiting just below. From the icy coasts of the Arctic to the pages of modern retellings, the Qalupalik remains a quietly powerful figure in myth. Its green skin, its low hum, its patient waiting beneath the ice, all of these are details that root it firmly in the culture from which it came. But beyond that, it is an expression of something universal, the need to recognize boundaries, to respect the unseen, and to understand that not all lures lead to safe places. In this way, the Qalupalik belongs, not just to the Arctic, but to the shared human tradition of telling stories that protect as much as they entertain. Before the age of maps that could outline the edges of continents and the sweep of oceans, there were spaces on the horizon where knowledge ended and imagination began. It was in these uncharted stretches of sea and sky that the ROC first took flight. Its wingspan, they said, could blot out the sun. Its talons could close around the broad back of an elephant, as though lifting a small hair. And its shadow, when it passed over the sea, could send whole crews of sailors to silence, each man looking upward in awe or dread. The earliest hints of the ROC come to us in fragments. Travelers' tales, sailors' warnings, the embroidered exaggerations of merchants who had seen much and yet found that, to be believed, they had to speak of more. In some of these accounts, the ROC was linked to the distant islands near Madagascar, a place rich with spices, strange animals, and according to rumor birds, so vast they could carry away entire ships. These were not stories told idly. The sea lanes of the Indian Ocean were alive with danger. Monsoon winds could turn suddenly. Shoals could appear out of nowhere. And above all, there was the constant sense that far from shore, one entered a realm where human rules no longer applied. The ROC, in that sense, was a fitting emblem for the mysteries of oceanic travel, an impossible bird in an impossible sky dot in the famous 1001 Nights. The ROC appears in the voyages of Sinbad the Sailor. In these stories, the ROC's eggs are said to be as large as domed roofs, its shell gleaming white under the tropical sun. To see one of these eggs was to stumble upon a fortune or a danger, for where there was an egg, the parent was never far, and no man, no matter how bold, could stand against a creature whose wings could churn the air into storms. Yet not all accounts of the ROC are hostile. In some tellings it is less a predator than an aloof force of nature unconcerned with the affairs of humans unless provoked. Sailors sometimes imagined it as a guardian of faraway lands, ensuring that only the truly worthy or the truly lucky could reach them. The scale of the ROC in these accounts is worth pausing over. Descriptions varied, but even the smallest put its wingspan at hundreds of feet. A single feather, they said, could be longer than a man's arm. Some swore they had seen such feathers washed ashore after storms. Whether these were from albatrosses, pelicans, or simply crafted fakes made for trading, they served as tangible proof for a creature that might otherwise live only in words. The ROC's presence in early literature served a double purpose. Thrilled with the idea of the extraordinary, but it also warned of the limits of human ambition. In an age where venturing too far from known coasts was a gamble with life itself, the ROC embodied both the promise and the peril of the unknown. When ancient sailors spoke of the ROC, they rarely began with the bird itself. Instead, they would talk about the long days of sailing of water, so still it looked like a sheet of hammered bronze under the midday sun, or waves so gentle they seemed like the breathing of some vast, unseen creature. The ROC existed at the far edges of those voyages, in places where land rose from the sea, like the back of some slumbering giant, and where mountains met the clouds without any clear boundary. It was always somewhere else, somewhere farther than you had yet gone, a little beyond the horizon your eyes could reach. The ports where these stories were told were never silent. They were filled with the clatter of barrels being rolled across docks, the creak of ropes tightening against masts, and the mixed smells of drying fish, spiced goods, and the faint, sharp scent of tar. A man might be mending a sail while telling the story, his hands never stopping their work, or a group of traders might swap tailies over bowls of hot broth, steam curling upward as their voices lowered. In such moments someone would say, far to the south, or maybe east, no one quite knows, there's a bird so vast its shadow turns the day into dusk. The lands where the ROC was said to live were always described in ways that made them both possible and impossible. Some swore it nested among the high cliffs of distant islands, where the wind carried the cries of seabirds in endless spirals, and the air smelled of salt and rain. Others claimed it made its home in inland deserts, where it could soar without interruption over dunes that shifted like waves. This contradiction never seemed to bother anyone. In the minds of those telling the tale, The ROC was not bound to one habitat. It belonged to any place large enough, wild enough, and strange enough to hold it. The maps of the time were not much help. A chart might show the outline of a coast, but beyond it the space would be filled with vague shapes, curling lines and notes like "Here be dragons" or "Great bird sighted." These drawings were less navigational aids than invitations to imagine. And so the ROC lived on the edges of ink and parchment, in those unfinished corners where knowledge gave way to wonder. The climate of its supposed homelands was always described in ways that mirrored the creature's own enormity. If the ROC was said to dwell near a mountain range, the peaks would be described as impossibly tall, their tops buried in clouds for entire seasons. If it was said to live in an archipelago, the islands would be scattered so widely across the sea that one could sail for weeks without sighting more than a thin line of rock against the horizon. There was a kind of gentle rhythm in these descriptions, a slow, patient building of a place that felt like it could hold something extraordinary without question. Those who claimed to have seen the ROC in its natural environment rarely offered much detail, perhaps because detail would have made it too real and thus too small. Instead, they would speak of impressions, a shadow falling across a deck, a sudden hush among the gulls, the way the wind changed direction for no clear reason. The ROC in these accounts was part of the landscape itself. It was not merely an animal. It was a moving piece of the world, as unmeasured and unmeasurable as the sea or the sky. To travel to such lands in those days was to commit to a kind of slowness that is difficult to imagine now. A ship might move for weeks with only the stars as its guide, each night bringing the same patterns overhead, each morning the same slow climb of the sun. In this monotony, the thought of a faraway place where the ROC might live was like a distant candle in the dark, a small, steady glow that kept the mind turning forward. When the sailors finally did reach some new shore, it often bore little resemblance to the ones in the stories. The cliffs might be lower, the trees less lush, the birds smaller and far more ordinary, but that never seemed to matter. The ROC did not need to be there for the journey to have meaning. Its imagined presence was enough to make each new arrival feel like a brush with something great and mysterious. And so the tales continued, passed on at the next port, reshaped and retold, until the next listener set out on their own voyage. Sometimes, in the quiet of an evening at sea, a sailor might stand at the railing and look toward the fading horizon. In the half-light, the outline of a distant cloud might swell into something larger, something winged. For a moment, the world would seem bigger, older, and more alive than the maps suggested. And whether the shape dissolved into ordinary mist, or held its form until darkness swallowed it, the thought would linger. Perhaps the ROC was still out there, gliding on winds no human had yet followed. There comes a point in nearly every great story when the telling begins to fade, not because the tale has lost its meaning, but because the world around it has quietly changed. For the ROC, this moment came slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the way a shoreline is worn down not by storms but by the steady, patient pull of the tide. The bird's vast shadow, once imagined over distant oceans and unexplored mountains, began to retreat not in the minds of those who cherished the stories, but in the way those stories were told, passed, and believed in the early centuries. When maritime trade was both lifeline and adventure, sailors returned home with their heads full of strange sights. It was natural for the ROC to live among these an anchor in the ocean of rumor and wonder that sustained men through long voyages. But as maps grew more precise and ships traveled farther with less uncertainty, the places where the ROC might dwell began to shrink. Islands once marked with a simple note, bird of great size, were now given names, coordinates, and careful descriptions of their flora and fauna. The disappearance of the ROC from common belief did not happen through disbelief alone. Rather, it was the quiet work of familiarity. As lands were charted, ports built, and coastlines mapped with neat, inked lines, the ROC's home was simply filled in. It is hard for a thing to remain endless when we think we know where it ends. In the ports of the Indian Ocean, where so many of the earliest ROC tales were told, change came like a slow tide of voices. The young sailors, eager and restless, wanted news of winds, currents, and markets more than old tales. They still listened, out of respect, when an older man spoke of the ROC's wings blotting out the moon, but they no longer took these stories to sea as navigational truth. Instead, the ROC became an after-dinner story, a quiet moment between the end of the meal and the washing of the bowls, something that lived alongside talk of family, storms past, and old friends lost to the waves. Even in this quieter life, the ROC held its place in certain traditions. In some coastal villages, the ROC was still painted in the corners of sea charts, not for guidance, but for protection. To see its outline in the ink was to feel that the voyage ahead might be guarded by something vast and beyond human reach. The merchants who used these charts might never speak of it aloud, but they kept the image there, as if the ROC could watch the seas in their stead. Over time, the ROC's form shifted in the telling. It grew even larger in some accounts, as if size alone could keep it from fading. In others, it became more a spirit than a bird, its wings, the clouds themselves, its eyes, the stars reflected on the ocean. And yet, for all these changes, its essence remained the same. The ROC was the embodiment of the faraway, the unreachable, the thing that lay just beyond the known world. By the late centuries, when great empires rose and fell across the regions where the ROC was once most strongly believed in, the bird had passed fully into the realm of legend. Scholars recorded it with careful detachment, noting sources, locations, and variant spellings of its name. Poets still invoked it, but more often as a symbol of longing, of strength, of the mysteries that travel could not dispel. Children still played games that involved flying like the ROC, racing down dusty lanes with their arms outstretched, their voices carrying the names of places they had never seen. Perhaps the most fitting place for the ROC, in the end, was in the deep, dreamlike state between waking and sleeping, those quiet hours when a traveler on a night voyage might step onto the deck and see the moon's pale light breaking on the water. The horizon would seem limitless. The sea would murmur its endless rhythm, and somewhere in the shifting of clouds and the sweep of the wind, the thought would come, perhaps the ROC is still out there. Perhaps it never left at all. The ROC, for all its imagined size, left the world in the smallest of ways. It was not slain by hunters, not disproven by scholars, not erased by force. It simply became less necessary in a world that thought it knew all its corners. And yet the ROC has never truly gone. It lives in the corners of ancient maps, and the margins of weathered journals, and the pauses between stories told by firelight. When we think of it now, we do so not to measure its wings or count its feathers, but to remember what it means to have a horizon that does not end. The ROC's greatest gift was not its shadow or its flight. It was the reminder that there is always more beyond what we can see, and in that way it still soars. To speak of the Qilin is to step into a different sort of history, not one that lies strictly in the lines of battlefields, dynasties, or the march of armies, but a history of ideas, of visions, and of the strange companionship between humanity and the imagined creatures it has carried through the centuries. The Qilin, sometimes described as a Chinese unicorn in simplified modern terms, is in truth far richer and far more intricate than any single comparison can convey. It is a creature born not only from one place, but from an ever-widening circle of influences, from the fertile river valleys of ancient China to the mountain passes that carried ideas in and out of the Middle Kingdom, and even farther to the courts of Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. The earliest roots of the Qilin in recorded history reach back more than 2,000 years, into the mists of the Zhou dynasty, where chroniclers spoke of it as a herald of harmony and divine favor. Its appearance, rare and always momentous, was thought to signal the reign of a wise ruler or the coming of a sage whose wisdom would alter the course of the realm. In these accounts, the Qilin was not simply a beast of physical form. It was an omen, a message written in the living shape of an animal, bridging the space between the earthly and the heavenly. Descriptions of the Qilin vary through time and place, but certain elements recur, like familiar notes in a long song. The Qilin's body is often likened to that of a deer or horse, though larger and more majestic, with hooves that do not trample grass, as it is said to walk upon clouds or the very air itself. It bears a single horn, or sometimes a pair rising from its brow, spiraled or straight, tipped with divine light. Its skin may be scaled like a fish or dragon, shimmering with gold, jade, or multicolored patterns that shift like silk in sunlight. Its tail may sweep like that of an ox or flare like the tail of a lion, depending on the region's artistry. The breath of the Qilin in certain legends is pure incense, a fragrance so soft and clear that flowers bloom in its wake. Yet what defines the Qilin most of all is its temperament. In nearly every telling, it is gentle, refusing to harm even the smallest insect. It appears only in lands ruled by justice, avoiding the corrupt and the cruel. When it must move through a forest, it somehow leaves every leaf untouched. When it crosses a river, its hooves never muddy the water. The Qilin, in this sense, is as much a moral idea as a physical creature, a living reminder of the virtues that rulers and common folk alike should uphold. It is no accident that the Qilin arose in a world where order and harmony were often ideals rather than realities, and the courts of kings where intrigue could be as deadly as war. The story of a creature that would bless only the righteous served as both hope and warning. For the peasants tilling their fields, the Qilin was a sign that somewhere beyond their reach, the balance between heaven and earth could be restored. By the Han Dynasty, the Qilin had taken firm root in Chinese thought. Sculptors carved it in stone to guard tombs, believing it would keep away evil spirits. Poets wove it into verse, pairing its name with other auspicious creatures like the dragon, phoenix, and tortoise, the four great symbols of cosmic harmony. In some accounts, Confucius himself was said to have been foreshadowed by the appearance of a Qilin which walked quietly into a village, its horn gleaming, before disappearing into the hills. Trade and diplomacy carried the Qilin beyond China's borders. In Korea it was called Gairen, and in Japan, Kirin. While retaining much of its moral symbolism, these versions took on local colors and shapes. The Japanese Kirin, for example, often bore a fiercer expression, more like a dragon than a deer, yet still retained its purity and gentle spirit. In each place the Qilin adapted to the artistic traditions it encountered, yet somehow kept the core of its identity intact. In the centuries that followed, travelers and traders brought new influences that shaped the Qilin's imagery. Some scholars believe that accounts of giraffes brought to China from Africa during the Ming Dynasty may have contributed to later depictions. Indeed, when Admiral Zheng He returned from his voyages to East Africa with a giraffe, the Ming court eagerly declared it a Qilin, seeing in its long neck and calm eyes a reflection of the creature described in ancient texts. For a brief time, the living giraffe walked in imperial gardens as a sign of heaven's favor. And yet, the Qilin was never simply a product of physical sightings. It lived in the realm of ideas, of the moral imagination, where the most important features were not those that could be measured, but those that could inspire. This is why, across dynasties and shifting artistic trends, the Qilin remained consistent in its nature, a bringer of peace, a guardian of the innocent, and a judge without cruelty, whose very presence told the world that goodness still had a place in it. The image of the Qilin, carved in jade or brushed in ink, has always carried a stillness, as though the creature itself knows it is a visitor here, bound to leave before its presence disturbs the balance it comes to bless. In this, The kiln reflects something deeply human, the longing for a moment when the world is whole, even if that moment is fleeting. The kiln's passage from the mists of legend into the settled lanes of culture was neither abrupt nor accidental. It was not a creature that thundered into the human imagination with the force of a tempest, but rather one that drifted gently into hearts and minds like a slow-falling snowflake that melts without sound, leaving only the quiet impression of something pure. The stories of the kiln did not need to be shouted. They were whispered from parent to child, traced with soft strokes and ink on rice paper carved into stone with patient chisel blows, embroidered in silk by lamplight. This quiet spread allowed the kiln to endure not merely as a passing fancy, but as a recurring presence in the moral and artistic life of East Asia. In the earliest Chinese bronzes, and later in the rich stone carvings of imperial tombs, the kiln appears not as a rampaging beast, but as a poised sentinel. These figures were often positioned alongside dragons and phoenixes, the great symbols of cosmic order. The kiln's role in this trinity was unique. Where the dragon could be fierce and the phoenix proud, the kiln represented measured compassion. It was the mediator, the creature that reminded rulers not merely of their power, but of the moral obligations that accompanied it. In the stillness of these carvings, whether placed at the gates of a Han dynasty mausoleum or in the gardens of the Ming court, there is a suggestion that the kiln does not merely guard the dead, but also the living who pass through its gaze. By the Tang dynasty, the kiln had found its way into the elaborate pageantry of imperial ceremonies, and paintings of courtly processions. You may find it walking with an air of lightness beside envoys, its horn lifted toward the sky. These depictions, lavishly detailed with gold leaf and vibrant mineral pigments, did not treat the kiln as a wild thing to be captured, but as an honored guest. In the way its hooves seemed barely to touch the earth, the painters captured not only its supernatural grace, but also its moral distance from the dusty concerns of human quarrels. It was during this same period that the kiln's image began to appear more prominently in literature. Poets invoked it not as a literal beast one might stumble upon in the wild, but as a metaphor for rare virtue. A minister of unimpeachable honesty could be likened to a kiln. A ruler who governed with justice and benevolence was said to have brought the kiln's blessing upon the land. In these verses, the creature's physical form faded almost entirely, leaving behind the distilled essence of its symbolic meaning, goodness so rare that its arrival was as wondrous as the blooming of a lotus in midwinter. In the decorative arts, the kiln became a favored motif for artisans working in jade, porcelain, lacquer, and embroidery. In jade carvings, the kiln often took on a compact, almost playful form, with rounded features and a gentle expression, as though the stone itself resisted being shaped into anything harsh. These jade kiln were carried as amulets, tucked into robes, or placed upon household altars, where they were believed to attract good fortune and shield the home from misfortune. In porcelain, especially the fine blue and white ware of the Ming and Qing dynasties. The Qilin appeared mid-leap, surrounded by clouds and flames, embodying its role as a heavenly envoy. The Qilin also made its way into the performing arts. In certain festivals, costumed dancers would portray the creature in elaborate masks and flowing robes embroidered with scales and cloud patterns. These performances were often part of rituals meant to bless the community, especially at times of new beginnings, such as the inauguration of a temple or the installation of a new magistrate. Unlike the lion dance, which could be boisterous and loud, the Qilin dance was more restrained, with slow, deliberate movements, meant to convey dignity and grace. The musicians accompanying it would play softer melodies, favoring flutes and strings, over drums, reinforcing the creature's gentle nature. In Korea, the Gairin appeared in both art and state rituals, particularly in association with just kings. Korean artists sometimes gave the Gairin a slightly more elongated form, with a head that combined deer-like elegance and dragon-like majesty. Its scales might be painted in greens and blues rather than the golden tones favored in China, reflecting the peninsula's own symbolic palette. In Japan, the Kirin found a place not only in religious art but in heraldry, adorning the crests of noble families who wished to be associated with justice and moral rectitude. The Japanese Kirin's facial features could be more intense, even fierce, but the underlying virtue it represented remained unchanged. The arrival of the giraffe in Ming China through Zheng He's voyages, though a historical curiosity, had an impact on artistic portrayals. For a brief period, artists began depicting Qilin with long necks and spotted coats, blending the mythical with the newly discovered. Some of these renderings, now preserved in museum scrolls, look almost like careful naturalist studies of giraffes. Yet they were still captioned as Qilin, their foreignness transformed into proof of the empire's far-reaching harmony with heaven's will. Here, the boundaries between reality and myth blurred, revealing how adaptable and enduring the Qilin's image could be. The Qilin's association with morality also ensured its presence in didactic works. In woodblock prints distributed to rural schools during the Qing dynasty, it might be shown alongside maxims encouraging filial piety, honesty, and diligence. Children growing up in such an environment would not think of the Qilin as a fantastical monster, but as a moral companion, invisible yet ever present, watching to see if they lived in a way that would invite its blessing. Religious thought, too, wove the Qilin into its fabric. In certain strands of Taoist cosmology, the Qilin was seen as a manifestation of the elemental balance between yin and yang, its body embodying the harmony of opposing forces. In Buddhist contexts, it was sometimes linked with the Bodhisattva ideal, representing the compassion that refrains from harm and the wisdom that sees the interconnectedness of all life. These interpretations gave the Qilin a theological dimension, allowing it to move seamlessly between the palace, the temple, and the village festival. One of the most enduring cultural legacies of the Qilin is its role in marking auspicious times. To say a Qilin has appeared was not merely to report a sighting, but to declare a moment of moral or cosmic significance. This belief carried into the calendars, where certain days were marked as Qilin days, considered especially favorable for weddings, the signing of treaties, or the founding of new settlements. Even today, in some parts of East Asia, the image of the Qilin is used in branding for businesses, schools, and products that wish to convey integrity, safety, and good fortune. The Qilin's artistic and cultural journey reveals a creature that is not bound by one medium, one style, or even one nation. Instead, it flows through the channels of culture like clear water, taking the shape of whatever vessel it enters while retaining the purity of its essence. Its adaptability is not a sign of weakness, but of enduring relevance. In every carving, painting, poem, and performance, the Qilin quietly reaffirms the same truth it carried in the earliest talis, that virtue, once recognized, has the power to cross boundaries and generations without losing its light. The decline of the Qilin in public imagination was not a sudden vanishing, like a candle extinguished in a gust of wind, but rather a slow dimming, like embers cooling after a long night of watchful burning. The creature's presence in art, literature, and ritual did not disappear entirely, but it slipped quietly from the center of cultural consciousness to its edges. This transition, subtle though it was, reflected shifts in the very rhythms of life across East Asia. Changes in political systems, the spread of new philosophies, the opening of trade routes, and the arrival of foreign ideas, all of which altered the landscapes in which such creatures once thrived. In the late Qing period, the empire faced profound social and political upheavals, foreign incursions, internal rebellions, and the crumbling authority of the imperial court left less room for the ceremonial luxuries that had once framed the Qilin's role in public life. State rituals once rich with symbolism were reduced or abandoned entirely, and with them faded the formal processions where a Qilin figure might have walked in measured grace beside dignitaries. The creature, once an emblem of imperial benevolence, now found itself without a stage on which to perform its quiet role. The advance of modernization played its part as well. New printing presses produced books and periodicals that favored reportage, science, and political commentary over the slow weaving of allegorical tales. The Qilin's appearance in literature became less frequent, and when it did appear, it was often treated as a quaint relic from a bygone era, a symbol of a world seen as increasingly impractical in the face of industrial machinery and global commerce. This was not necessarily disdain. Rather, it was the quiet shelving of an heirloom that no longer seemed to match the decor of the new age. Even in art, where the Qilin had enjoyed centuries of patient depiction, the creature began to retreat. The rise of Western-style painting and realism brought new subjects into vogue. Landscapes rendered with the perspective of the camera, portraits designed to capture exact likenesses, and still life studies that dwelled on the textures of modern goods. In such works, the Qilin, with its composite anatomy and moral symbolism, had little foothold. To many young artists, it belonged to the same category as ancient bronze is beautiful. Yes, but another time. Yet, despite this retreat from the spotlight, the kiln did not vanish altogether. Its image lingered quietly in household shrines, temple murals, and the margins of festival parades. In rural areas far from the industrial cities, artisans continued to carve it into furniture, embroider it onto wedding robes, and paint it onto talismans. Here the kiln lived on, not as an imperial symbol, but as a local guardian, a creature whose protective gaze could still be felt in the flicker of an oil lamp. The transformation of the kiln's role in society became most visible during the 20th century as nationalist movements sought to reclaim cultural heritage from the erosion of foreign influence. The kiln, along with other mythic figures such as the dragon and phoenix, was revived in certain ceremonial contexts, its image polished anew as part of a shared identity. In the designs of banknotes, postage stamps, and state emblems, the kiln occasionally appeared, not as a literal herald of virtuous rulers, but as a visual shorthand for the moral ideals to which the nation aspired. In Japan, the kiln's evolution took an unexpected turn. While the creature retained its place in traditional art and Shinto symbolism, it also became the namesake of one of the country's most famous brewing companies. This transformation from a celestial guardian to a corporate emblem might seem like a diminishment, yet it also speaks to the kiln's adaptability. In the modern Kirin logo, the creature still retains its composite beauty, scales along its body, a mane of wind-swept hair, and a noble horn. Though now printed on bottles and cans, it continues to carry, however subtly, the connotations of grace, rarity, and quality that it bore in the courts of emperors. Korea's Gairin, too, adapted. Quietly, it became less a public spectacle and more a private emblem, appearing in folk paintings that adorned homes or in small sculptures used as protective charms. Some scholars note that in the Korean imagination, the Gairin's association with justice and benevolent rulership faded as the country's political structures shifted, replaced instead with a more generalized symbolism of good fortune and peace. The global spread of East Asian culture in the late 20th and early 21st centuries brought the kiln into yet another phase of its existence. In fantasy novels, video games, and animated films, it has been reimagined for new audiences who may know little of its moral history, but are drawn to its striking appearance. Some modern depictions emphasize its animal grace, casting it as a magical mount or guardian spirit. Others lean into its rarity, presenting it as a quest objective or a mysterious wanderer glimpsed only at dawn. While these versions may simplify or alter the kiln's traditional attributes, they also ensure its continued presence in the global imagination. Interestingly, the kiln's role as a marker of moral virtue has found unexpected echoes in contemporary environmental discourse. In a world increasingly concerned with biodiversity loss and ecological balance, the kiln's ancient association with living in harmony with nature resonates anew. In some environmental campaigns in East Asia, stylized Qilin are used as mascots. To promote conservation, their gentle nature serving as a reminder that strength need not come at the cost of destruction. The digital age has given the Qilin yet another realm in which to wander. Online art communities produce thousands of interpretations, ranging from faithful reproductions of Ming scrolls to experimental hybrids that merge the Qilin's form with science fiction aesthetics. Social media spreads these images across borders and languages, allowing the Qilin to become, paradoxically, both more global and more individual. For some, it is a connection to ancestral culture. For others, it is simply a beautiful creature, free from any single cultural claim. And yet, despite all these transformations, one can still find the Qilin in its most ancient form, if one knows where to look. In certain temples in China, Korea, and Japan, the same quiet statues that stood centuries ago still watch over courtyards, their stone eyes soft by moss and time. In the pages of old poetry anthologies, the lines that praise the rare appearance of the Qilin still wait to be read, their meaning untouched by the passing of dynasties. In the hearts of those who remember the old stories, the Qilin still walks softly across the earth. Unseen but not forgotten. The Qilin's decline, then, is not a disappearance but a dispersal. Its image has scattered like seeds on the wind, finding new soils in which to take root. It no longer belongs solely to imperial courts or rural festivals. It belongs to anyone who finds in it a reflection of their own ideals. Its horn still points toward the heavens, not as a sign of dominion, but as a reminder that even in a noisy, hurried world, there is room for creatures of quiet virtue. In the end, the Qilin's journey through time is less like a sharp line drawn across a map, and more like the faint trail of a river that has meandered, split, and sometimes disappeared beneath the ground, only to emerge again in another place. It began as a rare and holy apparition, a herald of rulers whose virtue was so complete that even the beasts of the earth felt compelled to walk alongside them. It grew into a symbol that could be carved into palace gates, painted onto silk scrolls, embroidered into the hems of ceremonial robes. It lived in poetry, in prophecy, in whispered tales that passed through the generations. Over the centuries, its form adapted as it traveled. In China, it kept its delicate blend of dragon and deer. In Japan, it became the Kirin. In Korea, the Gairen. Each variant clothed in the fabric of local belief. Sometimes it was fierce, sometimes gentle, but always it was a creature set apart, one whose presence meant that something in the world was right. And yet, like many symbols rooted in the slow rhythms of agrarian and dynastic life, the Qilin could not remain untouched by the quickening pace of history. Political change, industrial growth, and the shift toward global modernity gradually moved it away from its original ceremonial place. No longer did emperors parade beneath its gaze. No longer did royal astrologers wait for its hoof prints as signs from heaven. The Qilin, like so many mythical beings, learned to survive not by resisting change, but by quietly folding itself into new context. It became an emblem on a beer label, a mascot for conservation, a shimmering mount in a video game. To some, these modern forms might seem like a lessening, as though the Qilin had been reduced to decoration or plaything. But perhaps this is only another step in its wandering another landscape through which it passes, leaving traces that future generations may follow back to its older, deeper meanings. For at the heart of the Qilin is a message that is as relevant now as it was in the days of emperors, that true strength can be quiet, that nobility is not measured by conquest, and that harmony between living things is both possible and worth striving for. Even in the modern age, there is a certain comfort in imagining a creature that would never trample the grass beneath its hooves, that would walk 1,000 miles to deliver a blessing, and that would vanish into the mist rather than bring harm. Somewhere, perhaps not in the physical world, but in the long corridors of human memory, the Qilin still walks. It moves at its own pace, unhurried, unafraid of being forgotten, for it has walked through dynasties, through revolutions, through the rise and fall of countless rulers. And as long as there are those who pause long enough to listen to old stories, who still feel a certain stillness in the idea of a creature that appears only when the world is at peace, the Qilin will continue to walk. Its journey is not over. It never will be. In the long tapestry of North American indigenous traditions, there are certain figures that cannot be contained within the confines of mere story. They are too vast, too deeply woven into the relationship between people, sky, and land to be. Called simply myths, the Thunderbird is one of these. It is a creature that does not just belong to a single tribe or a single place. It belongs to an entire continent's worth of sky. It belongs to the distant horizon before the storm, to the sudden rumble that rolls over the mountains, to the flash of light that cracks across a summer night. And yet, for all its grandeur, it is also a deeply personal figure, a being that can visit dreams, protect a village, or send a warning on the wind. Descriptions of the Thunderbird vary, but they always carry this sense of something far larger than ordinary life. Some nations describe its wings as so vast that when it takes flight, the air itself is thrown into motion, carrying clouds and shadow across the ground far below. When those wings beat, they create the wind. When its eyes flash, lightning streaks across the sky. When it calls out, the thunder answers. Feathers are often said to be the length of a canoe, with colors shifting between deep blue, cloud white, and stormy gray. Its beak is sharp and hooked, sometimes likened to that of a predatory bird, sometimes to the jagged curve of a bolt of lightning itself. The Thunderbird appears across many cultural landscapes. Among the Anishinaabe, it is known as Anamiki. The Thunderer, a powerful being who dwells in the highest reaches of the sky, often tasked with protecting the world from evil spirits that lurk beneath the surface of the waters. In the traditions of the Pacific Northwest coast, among the Kwakwakkwak, the Haida, the Tlingit, and others, it is a master of storms, a supernatural hunter who preys on enormous whales, lifting them from the ocean with its talons. In Lakota and Dakota stories, it is Wakijak, a sacred spirit who maintains the balance of the world and serves as both guardian and punisher. In nearly every tradition, the Thunderbird is not merely an animal of great size, but a being of spiritual magnitude, one that can shape the fate of humans and the land alike. Its time is both eternal and seasonal. The Thunderbird is often associated with the arrival of spring and summer, with storms that bring much-needed rain to fields and forests. Some elders describe the Thunderbird as migrating, moving with the seasons, disappearing into a far-off mountain or island during the winter months, and returning when the earth is ready to grow again. In other stories, it resides permanently in the west, where the sun sinks, or in the highest mountain peaks, or on a distant floating island beyond the reach of ordinary travel. In every version, the Thunderbird exists at the threshold between what is seen and what is felt, the horizon where weather forms before it breaks dot. To understand the Thunderbird fully, one must also understand the nature of oral tradition in the cultures that carry it. These are not static stories fixed in a book. They are living accounts, told and retold by elders, shaped by the seasons, the needs of the community, and the presence of the listeners. A story about the Thunderbird, told during a long winter night, might emphasize its power to bring renewal and the greening of the land. The same story told during a summer storm might highlight its protective nature or its role in restraining chaotic forces that could harm the people. In some communities, the Thunderbird is addressed directly in prayer before journeys or during times of danger, as if it could hear across the vast distances of wind and cloud. Its symbolism is layered. On one level, it is an explanation of natural forces, why thunder sounds, why lightning strikes, why storms seem to have intention. But on another, deeper level, it is a teacher, a reminder that power must be tempered with responsibility. The Thunderbird's strength is vast, but it is never wantonly destructive in the oldest tellings. It does not create storms for cruelty, but to maintain balance, to water the earth, to remind humans of forces greater than themselves. This balance is crucial. The same storm that nourishes crops can also flatten them. The same wind that clears smoke can also strip away roofs. The Thunderbird embodies that duality, and in doing so, reflects the truth of life itself. Some depictions place it in constant battle with the great horned serpent, a water spirit of immense and often malevolent power. The Thunderbird strikes the serpent with lightning, keeping it from rising from the deep to harm humans. This eternal conflict between sky and water, between storm and flood, is more than a story of animals fighting. It is a symbolic expression of the cycles of weather and the need for balance between opposing forces in the natural world. Without the Thunderbird's vigilance, the serpent might overrun the land. Without the serpent's presence, there might be no reason for the Thunderbird to stir, and the skies would fall silent. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Thunderbird's imagery is ancient indeed. Petroglyphs and rock paintings depicting large, winged figures with outstretched talons have been found throughout North America, some dating back hundreds or even thousands of years. These figures often share symbolic space with water creatures, sun motifs, and hunting scenes, indicating that the Thunderbird was part of a larger spiritual and cosmological worldview. In some sites, the Thunderbird is carved with wings spread wide, as if embracing or overshadowing the entire scene, suggesting its overarching importance in the life and thought of the people. The longevity of the Thunderbird's presence in human imagination is remarkable, but it is not surprising. Storms are among the most universal and awe-inspiring phenomena in human experience. They are unpredictable, yet cyclical, destructive, yet nourishing, terrifying, yet beautiful. The Thunderbird, as a personification of this paradox, offers a way for people to approach the immensity of the storm with a mixture of respect, caution, and reverence. To see the clouds gathering on the horizon, and to imagine that somewhere within them a great bird is beating its wings, this transforms the impersonal forces of nature into something relational, something with which one can have a kind of dialogue. In quiet moments, far from the roar of wind and rain, the Thunderbird is still present in the mind. Its image appears in carved totem poles, and painted drums, in beadwork patterns that carry its shape across generations. Children hear its name in lullabies and cautionary tales. Hunters call upon it for protection on long journeys. Its story is never told exactly the same way twice, and yet it is always unmistakably itself. The Thunderbird is not just an old legend. It is a part of the living memory of the land and the people who continue to care for that land. It is a reminder that the sky above is not empty. It is full of presence, full of power, and full of the possibility that something vast and watchful is still there, riding the wind from one horizon to the next. To speak of the Thunderbird in the world of ceremony is to speak of a presence that is both seen and unseen, both known and mysterious. For countless generations, its image has appeared in the moments when a community gathers not simply to tell a story, but to enact it, to bring it into the rhythm of life. In many indigenous traditions, ceremonial life is not merely symbolic. It is an active relationship with the beings who inhabit the world. And so the Thunderbird is not just honored in words, but in actions, in dances, in songs, in the arrangement of feathers, in the deliberate choice of colors and patterns that evoke its storm-born nature. Among the peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast, the Thunderbird appears prominently in potlatch ceremonies, elaborate gatherings that mark important events such as marriages, the naming of children, the passing of a chief, or the forging of alliances between clans. Here, carved masks with outstretched beaks and sweeping wings are worn by dancers, who move in a slow, powerful rhythm to the sound of drums that echo like distant thunder. The opening of the beak in some masks is designed to mimic the flashing of lightning, and when the dancer's steps intensify, It is as if the storm itself has arrived within the cedar walls of the big house. In these moments, the Thunderbird is not a distant figure in the sky. It is present, moving among the people, carrying the memory of storms and the promise of renewal. In the Great Lakes region, the Anishinaabe and other related nations maintain traditions in which the Thunderbird is invoked as a spiritual guardian. Offerings of tobacco are sometimes made to the sky before a journey, or in thanks after a safe return. In some ceremonies, the Thunderbird is associated with healing, not in the sense of gentle comfort, but in the sense of breaking through what is stagnant, much as a storm clears heavy air and brings fresh rain. To call upon the Thunderbird in this way is to ask for transformation, for a force strong enough to sweep away harm and restore balance. Lakota and Dakota ceremonies also recognize the Thunderbird as one of the Waken, the sacred powers. Its role is complex. It can punish wrongdoing, but it can also protect the people from forces that threaten to unbalance the world. In vision quests, young men have reported seeing the Thunderbird in dreams or in waking visions, a sign interpreted by elders as a call to a particular spiritual path. The arrival of such visions is treated with seriousness, for they carry the weight of responsibility as much as they carry the gift of insight. Across all these traditions, certain patterns emerge in the ceremonial representation of the Thunderbird. The colors most often associated with it are deep blues, blacks, whites, and sometimes red, the colors of storm clouds, lightning, and the sky after rain. Feathers, both real and carved in wood, are arranged to suggest motion and flight. The sound of drums is central. Its deep, resonant pulse mirrors the heartbeat of the storm, while rattles and whistles may imitate the rush of wind or the cry of a great bird high above. In some places, the ceremonial leader will tell an origin story of the Thunderbird before the performance begins, reminding the gathered people that what they are about to witness is not entertainment, but a renewal of connection to something vast. The seasons, too, play their role in shaping how the Thunderbird is remembered and invoked. In the spring, when storms bring the first rains to awaken dormant seeds, the Thunderbird is thanked for the return of life to the land. In the heat of summer, when sudden tempests sweep across plains or rise over lakes, it is seen as a protector, keeping the worst forces at bay. In autumn, the Thunderbird's storms prepare the ground for the coming rest of winter, tearing away what is no longer needed and leaving the earth clean and bare. In winter, its absence or quiet is a reminder that even the strongest powers have their cycles of rest. This seasonal rhythm also shapes the way oral traditions about the Thunderbird are told. In some communities, stories about the Thunderbird are not told in the summer months, out of respect for the being itself and to avoid attracting its storms at the wrong time. Instead, the long nights of winter become the canvas for these tales, when the storm sleeps and the telling of its deeds can be done safely. These winter stories often emphasize the Thunderbird's wisdom and restraint, showing that power is not merely a matter of force, but of knowing when to act and when to hold back. Over centuries, The image of the Thunderbird has shifted in response to changing historical circumstances while still retaining its core essence. The arrival of European settlers and the changes that followed brought both disruption and transformation to indigenous ways of life. Some traditional ceremonies were suppressed by colonial governments, while others adapted to new conditions. In certain cases, the Thunderbird was reinterpreted through Christian-influenced lenses, becoming an angelic figure in the sky, or even being quietly merged with biblical imagery of divine messengers. Yet in other places, the Thunderbird remained, steadfastly itself resisting assimilation into foreign frameworks, and instead standing as a symbol of resilience. In art, too, the Thunderbird's form evolved. Early rock art and petroglyphs gave way to painted hides, carved masks, and later beadwork and textile patterns. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Thunderbird began to appear on trade goods and in souvenirs sold to non-native buyers, sometimes losing the depth of its meaning in the process. However, in the hands of indigenous artists, its portrayal remained an act of cultural continuity. Contemporary carvers, painters, and storytellers continue to depict Thunderbird not as a relic of the past, but as a living presence shaping the identity of their communities. Today, the Thunderbird can be found in both traditional and modern contexts, in powwow regalia, on murals in urban native neighborhoods, and the logos of native-owned businesses, and in digital art shared online by young indigenous creators. It has also entered popular culture, appearing in films, novels, and video games, though often stripped of the depth and specificity of its cultural roots. For those who belong to the traditions from which it comes, this creates a dual challenge: to protect the sacred aspects of the Thunderbird, while also navigating its increasingly global recognition. What remains unchanged, however, is the Thunderbird's role as a bridge between the seen and the unseen. Whether in the solemnity of a winter storytelling circle, the controlled chaos of a summer storm dance, or the quiet act of offering tobacco to the morning sky, the Thunderbird remains a reminder of the relationship between humans and the forces that shape their world. Its presence in ceremony is not ornamental. It is an affirmation of the belief that the world is alive, that the sky is inhabited, and that respect is due to those powers that dwell beyond human reach. The slow beat of a drum, the smell of cedar smoke curling through the air, the murmur of voices as people gather, wrapping themselves in blankets against the chill. Somewhere above, clouds begin to form, their undersides heavy and dark. A flicker of lightning touches the horizon. In that moment, every eye lifts to the sky, and though no great wings are seen, every heart knows the Thunderbird is near. The Thunderbird is not only a being of wind and rain, of lightning and cloud, but also a figure whose symbolic presence threads quietly through the fabric of human imagination. Symbols are not fixed. They are living shapes in the mind, and the Thunderbird has been shaped and reshaped through centuries of telling and retelling. Yet in all its varied forms, certain themes remain constant: power balanced by wisdom, transformation born from disruption, and the connection between the human world and the forces of nature. In the stories told around the winter fires, the Thunderbird is more than a character. It is a teacher. Sometimes it teaches directly, delivering lessons to individuals in visions or dreams. Other times its lessons are indirect, woven into the events of the tale. For instance, one story might tell of a young hunter who defies the warnings of his elders and travels into forbidden territory, only to be caught in a violent storm. In the heart of the tempest, he sees the Thunderbird's massive form and is struck by lightning, not to harm him but to mark him. He returns home humbled, carrying a new understanding of his place in the balance of the world. In this way, the Thunderbird's power is both awe-inspiring and deeply personal. As a symbol, the Thunderbird often stands for protection. In some traditions, it guards against the underworld spirits or monstrous beings that threaten the earth. In others, it serves as a guardian of moral order, punishing those who bring harm to the community. This protective aspect makes it a natural emblem for strength, honor, and vigilance. Warriors in certain cultures would paint the Thunderbird's likeness on their shields, believing that its spirit would lend them courage in battle. Even today, some native veterans organizations in North America use the Thunderbird as a symbol of their service, blending ancient meaning with contemporary expressions of duty. Another dimension of its symbolism is transformation. Storms, for all their destructive force, are agents of renewal. They clear the air, water the land, and sometimes alter the shape of the terrain itself. In the same way, the Thunderbird is seen as a force that can bring about profound change, whether in the landscape, in the course of events, or in a person's inner life. Those who receive a Thunderbird vision may find their entire path altered, their sense of identity expanded to include a new responsibility or role within the community. The Thunderbird also serves as a reminder of interconnectedness. Its home is in the highest skies, yet its actions affect the ground below, bringing rain for crops, wind to move seeds, and the renewal of rivers and lakes. This mirrors the human understanding that what happens in one realm inevitably affects another. In this way, the Thunderbird becomes a living metaphor for the unity of the world, a truth that has been recognized by indigenous cultures for millennia, but is only now being rediscovered by a global society seeking balance with the earth. In modern storytelling, the Thunderbird has traveled far from its original cultural settings, appearing in fantasy novels, films, comics, and games. Sometimes it is faithfully portrayed, with care taken to respect its cultural roots. More often, it becomes a generalized mythical bird of storms, stripped of its specific tribal associations. In such cases, the Thunderbird may be given a different name, or its appearance may be altered beyond recognition. Golden feathers instead of dark storm plumage, for instance, or eyes that glow with fire rather than lightning. These adaptations, while imaginative, risk erasing the deep cultural meanings tied to the Thunderbird's image. For many indigenous artists and storytellers, this global spread presents both a challenge and an opportunity. On the one hand, they must contend with misrepresentations that flatten the Thunderbird into a fantasy trope. On the other hand, they have the chance to reclaim the image, to tell its story on their own terms to audiences who may have never heard it told properly. Contemporary indigenous literature, film, and digital media often feature the Thunderbird, not as a relic of a vanished world, but as a present vital force, one that continues to guide, protect, and inspire. The Thunderbird's symbolic power extends even into the realms of activism and environmental stewardship. Some indigenous-led environmental movements have adopted it as a symbol of the fight to protect water, land, and air. The logic is simple. The Thunderbird is a being of the sky who brings the rains that make life possible. To harm the land is to dishonor the Thunderbird. To defend the land is to honor it. In this sense, the Thunderbird story becomes not just a piece of cultural heritage, but a call to action in the present day. And yet, despite its many appearances in art, ceremony, activism, and popular culture, the Thunderbird remains elusive. Its true nature cannot be captured fully in a single carving, painting, or story. It is a living presence, felt as much as seen, known as much through silence as through speech. The elders say that the Thunderbird comes and goes as it pleases, revealing itself only to those who are ready to see. Its storms may be sudden and fierce, but they are never without purpose. Its lightning may strike without warning, but it always strikes where it must. In the quiet moments after a storm, when the air is clean and the earth smells of rain, one might look to the sky and imagine a vast shadow moving behind the clouds. There is no sound but the dripping of water from leaves and the distant rumble of thunder fading into the hills. It is in such moments, in the pause between endings and beginnings, that the Thunderbird's presence is most deeply felt. For it is not merely a creature of the past, but a companion to the present, and a promise to the future. Thus the Thunderbird's flight continues, across generations, across landscapes, across the ever-changing sky. It is at once a guardian, a teacher, a symbol, and a mystery. And as long as storms roll across the plains, as long as rain falls to nourish the land, as long as people look upward with both awe and gratitude, the Thunderbird will remain. Wings spread wide against the horizon, carrying the stories of the earth in the beating of its heart. If you want, I can now give you the Thunderbird conclusion before we move on to our next legendary creature. Would you like me to do that now? The Thunderbird is not just a figure in the distant stories of the past. It is a presence that stretches its wings across time. From its ancient beginnings in the traditions of indigenous peoples of North America to its place in modern art, literature, and environmental symbolism, it has remained both constant and ever-changing. It is a storm in the shape of a bird, a teacher in the form of a vision, a guardian whose protection comes with a reminder of the balance all life depends upon. Across the three parts of its story, We have followed it through the high mountain, skies across the wide plains, and deep into the layered meanings of its presence. We have seen it as the bringer of rain and lightning, the voice of storms, the shaper of landscapes. We have seen it as a protector of communities, a moral force that punishes wrongdoing and honors those who live in harmony with the land. And we have seen it as a living symbol, one that adapts to new contexts, speaks to new generations, and continues to inspire those who seek connection with the natural world. The Thunderbird's flight is not bound by a single era or a single interpretation. It moves between the physical and the spiritual, between the visible and the invisible. For some, it is a literal being, a great bird that dwells among the clouds. For others, it is an idea, a story shape that holds within it the truths of renewal, transformation, and interconnection. But whether it is seen as flesh and feather or as dream and symbol, the effect is the same. It invites those who hear its story to look beyond themselves to the vast cycles of wind, water, and sky. Its storms are moments of both danger and gift, danger in their raw, uncontrollable force, and gift in the renewal they bring. To stand in the presence of a thunderbird storm, whether in waking life or in the mind's eye, is to be reminded of one's own smallness in the face of nature's vast designs. And yet there is comfort in that smallness, for it means we are part of something larger, something that stretches beyond the horizon and into the unending sky dot. So the Thunderbird continues in carvings, in beadwork, in songs, in the quiet, teachings of elders, in the visions that come to those who listen. Its shadow may pass over a village, or over the mind of a lone traveler. It may be felt in the rumble before the rain, or in the long silence after a storm has moved on. And in every case it carries the same reminder that power is nothing without wisdom, that strength is most meaningful when it serves the whole, and that all things are connected, earth to sky, sky to rain, rain to life. Some say the Thunderbird will always be here as long as there are storms to ride and clouds to call home. Others believe that it comes and goes in cycles, appearing only when it is truly needed. But in either case, its story endures, because the world will always need the lessons it carries. And perhaps somewhere beyond the clouds it still soars, a silhouette against the setting sun, wings outstretched, lightning flickering in its eyes, watching over the earth below. Before the whirring hum of modern engines and the warm electric glow that keeps winter's teeth at bay, there was the unbroken darkness of the Arctic night. For the Inuit people, this darkness was not merely the absence of light, it was a living, shifting space filled with sounds, scents, and presences both known and mysterious. Out on the tundra, where the snow stretches into the horizon and the stars shine like frozen sparks, stories were told to explain what could not be seen. And in those stories, few figures loomed larger or prowled more quietly than the Amir. OK dot. The Amorok belongs to a world without cities, without metal rails or asphalt roads. It is born from the long memory of the Arctic, from a place where Survival is never taken for granted, and the line between life and death is measured in minutes of exposure. It is said to be a wolf, but not like any wolf known to the hunter's eye. The Amorok is a creature of impossible size, so large that no pack can match it, for it hunts alone. In Inuit oral tradition, this is one of its defining traits, the lone predator, silent and relentless, roaming under the dim green curtain of the northern lights, or beneath a moon so bright it casts hard shadows on the snow dot. In describing the Amorok, elders often spoke with deliberate slowness, letting the image grow in the listener's mind. Its fur is darker than the night sky, so dark that it swallows the moonlight instead of reflecting it. Its paws are vast, each one pressing deep into the snow without making a sound. The head, massive and angular, carries eyes that gleam with an intelligence not entirely animal, eyes that do not merely see, but seem to weigh and measure the heart of the one they look upon. In some tellings, the Amorok's breath freezes in the air, drifting behind it like a ghostly fog, marking its silent passage. Legends say that the Amorok is not an ordinary beast, but a spirit wolf, perhaps older than the first people who came. Across the ice from Siberia into what is now the Arctic, it does not travel with others of its kind. It has no den. It is always moving, always watching. It appears when someone ventures too far from the safety of the camp, when a lone traveler walks the edge of the frozen sea, when a hunter lingers too long in a snow-laden valley dot, and yet, as with many figures of Inuit storytelling, the Amorok is more than just a danger. It is a teacher. In the Arctic, every tale carries a lesson, and the lesson of the Amorok is clear. Never underestimate the night. Never wander without purpose, and never believe you are beyond the reach of the wilderness. In some villages, parents would remind restless children not to slip away from camp after dark, telling them that the Amorok hunts those who roam alone. But this was not just to frighten, it was to instill an instinct for caution that could save a life in the biting cold. The Amorok is most often spoken of in the long winter months, when daylight is brief and the aurora drapes the sky like a moving tapestry. Around the Qilip, the traditional seal oil lamp, families would gather, the soft yellow light flickering on the carved bone and driftwood that served as home. Outside, the wind might howl against the walls, the snow rattling like sand across the roof. It was in such moments that an elder would lean forward and begin to speak of a time when someone known to the elder, or to the elder's elder, heard the Amorok's footsteps behind them and lived to tell the tale. One story from the western coast of Greenland tells of a young hunter who decided to check his traps late in the night, despite his father's warnings. The moon was high, the snow hard underfoot, and the air so still that every sound carried for miles. As he bent to check a snare, he felt the hair on his neck rise. He turned and saw at the far edge of the frozen river a shape darker than the shadows, moving without sound. It was larger than any bear he had seen, but it moved like a wolf head low, body flowing with each step. The hunter did not run. He knew to walk slow and steady, back toward the village, never turning his back. By the time he reached the first of the lamps, the shape had melted into the night. He never again left camp after sundown. Such tales were not meant to be dismissed as superstition. In a place where venturing alone into the dark could mean freezing to death or falling prey to predators, these warnings wrapped themselves in the fur of myth to ensure they stayed alive in memory. And so, generation after generation, the Amorok prowled the minds of the Inuit, half-real, half-spirit, entirely unforgettable. The Amorok is not a creature to be trapped or hunted. It exists beyond the reach of spear or rifle. Some say it is as old as the first snow, as patient as the ice that grinds mountains into sand. It is not always an enemy. Sometimes, in the oldest stories, the Amorok appears to those who are lost, not to devour them, but to test their strength. Those who stand firm, who respect the wilderness, may find themselves spared. Those who falter may vanish, their fate whispered in the wind. Here, in the heart of the Arctic night, the Amorok waits not as a monster in the Western sense, but as a presence, a reminder, a silent shadow that moves where no human foot dares to tread. And as long as there are long nights in the north, as long as snow falls and the aurora dances, its story will continue to be told in the warm, flickering glow of the Qilip. In the telling of the Amorok's tale, one quickly learns that the Inuit do not speak of their myths as if they are sealed away in some distant past. They are living things, woven into the cycles of the land and sea, carried forward on the breath of the storyteller. The Amorok, more than a singular beast, is a figure of symbolic power. It is a guardian and a warning, a reflection of the Arctic itself, beautiful, unyielding, and deadly to those who fail to respect it. To understand why the Amorok persists so vividly in Inuit memory, one must step into the worldview that shaped it. In the Arctic, there is no gentle backdrop. The environment commands attention. It demands skill, respect, and a constant awareness of one's own fragility. The snowfields are not passive landscapes. They are shifting, living forces. Blizzards can appear like spirits in the distance, sweeping across the horizon until they engulf you. The sea ice groans and cracks, reshaping itself without warning. To live here is to accept that you share the land not only with other humans, but with forces both animal and supernatural that are as much a part of the environment as the wind and cold. The Amorok sits at the threshold between the natural and the supernatural. On one hand, it is entirely plausible to imagine a large, solitary wolf in the vast stretches of the Arctic. Wolves do roam the tundra, sometimes appearing without sound in the white silence. On the other hand, the sheer size, the uncanny intelligence, and the solitary hunting habits of the Amorok place it outside the realm of the ordinary. It becomes a bridge between what is known and what is felt, a creature that belongs equally to reality and to the space just beyond it, among Inuit elders. The Amorok is not simply an animal spirit, it is also a moral compass. Its stories are never merely for entertainment. They come wrapped in a lesson, usually aimed at the young, but just as relevant to the adult who has grown overconfident. In one telling, the Amorok comes for those who wander too far from their people, forgetting the value of community. And another, it appears to hunters who take more than they need, a silent shadow reminding them that greed in the Arctic is a quick path to ruin. The Amorok's solitary nature carries its own symbolic weight. Wolves in reality hunt in packs, relying on cooperation to survive the harsh winters. But the Amorok walks alone, its power so great that it needs no companions. This is a reversal of the natural order, a reminder that some beings operate outside the rules, untamed and answerable to no one. The lesson here is twofold. Respect the normal balance of life, but also be aware that there are forces which do not fit into that balance, and they can appear without warning. In some older versions of the myth, the Amorok also appears in a more protective role, particularly toward those who have been wronged or abandoned. These stories are rarer and often told in a softer tone. One version from the Baffin Island region speaks of a young boy, orphaned in the deep winter, who wandered away from camp in despair. As he lay shivering in the snow, a great shadow fell over him. Expecting death, he closed his eyes only to feel warmth as the creature lay beside him, shielding him from the wind. By morning, the Amorok was gone, and the boy had enough strength to make his way back to the village. This side of the myth shows the Amorok not simply as a predator, but as a test of will, a force that can either destroy or save, depending on how it is met. This duality, the capacity to harm or to help, is a theme woven through much of Inuit folklore. The Arctic is not malevolent by nature, but it is indifferent. It will claim those who are careless, yet it will reward those who learn to move with its rhythms. The Amorok embodies this philosophy. It is dangerous not because it seeks malice, but because it is part of a world where survival depends on respect and understanding. The Amorok's imagery in oral tradition is rich with sensory details. Storytellers describe the sound of its footsteps as so light they seem to pass through the snow rather than crush it. The air grows sharper when it is near, as if the cold itself deepens in its presence. Its eyes, always its eyes, are said to hold the green of distant icebergs or the pale shimmer of moonlight on frost. To meet its gaze is to feel the weight of the land judging you, asking silently whether you belong here. Inuit narratives often avoid absolute statements about whether the Amorok is real. That is a question rooted in a Western mindset, where creatures are either fact or fiction. In the Inuit worldview, such distinctions are less important. The Amorok is real in the sense that it holds power, it shapes behavior, inspires caution, and carries the weight of generations' wisdom. Whether it leaves physical tracks in the snow is almost irrelevant. The tracks it leaves in the mind are the ones that matter. In the seasonal cycle of the Arctic, the Amorok's presence is most strongly felt in the long dark of winter. This is the time when the line between the living and the spirit world feels thin when the aurora sweeps across the sky like a curtain revealing hidden shapes. Hunters travel less in this period, and families stay close, their days measured by the glow of the Qalupalik and the slow burn of seal oil. It is during these long nights that the Amorok returns most vividly in the stories, often beginning with the same phrase. They say, on nights like this, while outsiders might think of such myths as frightening, to the Inuit they are as much a part of home as the sound of the wind or the smell of the sea. The Amorok belongs to them not as a thing to be hunted or conquered, but as a presence that watches over the boundaries between safety and danger. It is a story that insists on humility, a reminder that even the strongest hunter can become prey if they forget their place in the world. And so, generation after generation, the Amorok's legend continues, passed along in a voice both steady and deliberate. It is a voice meant to linger, to echo in the mind when the listener finds themselves alone on the ice, under the vast, indifferent sky. In that silence, in that cold, one might hear the faintest sound, the nearly weightless step of something large moving just beyond the edge of sight. Whether or not the Amorok is truly, there matters less than the fact that you believe it could be. The Amorok's story is not a fleeting tale meant for a single winter's night. It is something that stretches across the years, settling into the memory of a people whose lives have always been shaped by the delicate balance between abundance and scarcity, safety and peril. In the long memory of the Inuit, stories are not linear, they are cyclical, like the seasons returning again and again with subtle changes, each telling carrying a slightly different shade of meaning. The Amorok moves within this cycle, a shadow that belongs equally to the present and to the deep past. When a story survives for centuries, it is rarely by accident. The Amorok has endured not because it is a convenient explanation for fear, but because it speaks directly to the heart of survival in the Arctic. The creature is bound to the rhythm of the hunt, not just the physical act of pursuing game, but the spiritual and communal dimensions of it. In a land where a failed hunt can mean hunger, the act of hunting is never trivial. It is wrapped in rituals, respect, and a kind of dialogue between hunter and prey. The Amorok, as both predator and symbolic force, stands at the crossroads of these worlds. In some communities, the Amorok story is told before the hunting season begins, not to frighten the hunters, but to remind them of what they owe to the land. This retelling is slow, almost meditative, lingering over details, the soft crunch of snow under boots, the way frost forms on the eyelashes, the quiet breath of the dogs. These sensory images anchor the hunter's mind, connecting them to their surroundings in a way that is both practical and reverent. It is a subtle way of saying, remember where you are, remember the forces that watch you. The Amorok is often said to hunt at night, and this alone marks it as different from ordinary. Wolves. Wolves, like humans, are social hunters, their packs working in concert to track, surround, and bring down prey. But the Amorok's solitary hunts mirror another kind of danger, the lone threat that cannot be anticipated through familiar signs. It does not howl to call others, nor does it leave the trails a pack might. It appears as if from nowhere, as though it has been watching all along. This makes it an apt symbol for the unpredictable hazards of Arctic life, the sudden crack in the ice, the storm that arrives without warning, the shifting migration of animals dot in the layered fabric of Inuit oral tradition. The Amorok is also a keeper of boundaries. It is not only the edge of the sea ice or the borders of the hunting grounds that it guards, but the invisible lines that divide safety from recklessness. A young hunter who pushes too far beyond the agreed hunting range might hear the old warning, "Do not make the Amorok your guide." This phrase does not mean the creature will physically lead the hunter astray. It means that once you stray beyond the bounds of wisdom, you are in its territory, and survival there is never certain dot in the quiet. The Amorok's presence is often imagined rather than seen. A single paw print in the snow too large, too deep for any ordinary wolf, may be enough to stir unease. Elders tell of moments when hunters feel a sudden chill, not from the wind, but from an unseen gaze on their back. In such moments, the correct action is not to run, but to return slowly and deliberately to familiar ground. To flee is to mark yourself as prey. This is not merely superstition. It is a reflection of the Arctic truth that panic leads to mistakes, and mistakes in such an environment can be fatal. The Amorok's legend also weaves itself into the domestic life of the Inuit, not just the hunt. Children hear the story as they sit by the Qilip, the flickering flame sending shadows dancing on the igloo walls. The tale is not told in the voice of dread, but in the measured, steady tone of one passing on something essential. There is a quiet reassurance in it. The world is vast, but it is knowable, and there are rules that keep you safe. The Amorok's danger is not a reason to hide from the world. It is a reason to learn it well. And yet, for all the cautionary tone, there is a strange admiration for the Amorok's power. Some hunters speak of it with a kind of respect one might reserve for a rival whose skill cannot be denied. The Amorok in these accounts is not mindless. It is intelligent, calculating, and deeply attuned to its environment. Such qualities are prized in a good hunter, whether human or beast. To cross paths with the Amorok and survive is not necessarily to defeat it, but to have proven yourself in its eyes. There are even whispers rare, half playful, half serious, about those who claim to have been guided by the Amorok. These are not the reckless ones, but individuals who were lost in the deep snow, far from their people, and who felt the presence of something large moving ahead of them. They followed it at a distance, never seeing it clearly, until they found themselves back near the safety of camp. Whether this was truly the Amorok or a trick of the mind matters less than the comfort these stories bring. In them, the Amorok is a silent shepherd, leading the lost back home. Over time, the Amorok has become more than a figure of local legend. As outside cultures learned of Inuit traditions, the Amorok began to appear in books, art, and modern adaptations. And yet, even in these newer forms, the heart of the legend remains the solitude, the shadowed presence, the balance of danger and respect. It is perhaps inevitable that such a creature would capture the imagination of those far beyond the Arctic, for it speaks to a universal human experience, the knowledge that there are forces larger than ourselves, forces that demand humility, and so the Amorok endures, not only as a hunter in the snow, but as a long echo in the mind. It follows you out of the story and into the still moments when you feel the cold bite at your skin, when you realize the vastness around you. You may never see it, and you may never hear its silent steps, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, you will remember that it is out there, somewhere, watching. The Amorok, as it stands in Inuit tradition, is not simply a frightening animal of the night. It is a deeply layered emblem of Arctic life, a composite of memory, survival instinct, and cultural wisdom. Across generations, its form has remained, consistent enough to be recognized, yet flexible enough to adapt to the needs of each telling. It is a presence at the edges of the village firelight, a shadow at the boundary between known safety and untamed wilderness. Its green-eyed stare and solitary nature set it apart from the familiar wolves of the tundra. The Amorok does not symbolize the everyday challenges of life. It embodies the exceptional, the unpredictable, and the dangerous, those moments when a single misstep can shift fortune into tragedy. As such, it has always been more than a simple monster in the snow. It is a warning encoded in story, a living reminder that even the most skilled hunter is never beyond the reach of nature's will. Inuit elders, who carry the weight of countless winters in their memories, do not tell the Amorok's tale only to scare. They tell it to keep the young mindful, to guide the traveler's steps, to remind every listener that life here is balanced on a fine thread. Fear is part of it, yes, but so is respect and even admiration. The Amorok is powerful, but not mindless, dangerous, but not wasteful. In its calculated hunts and silent movement, it reflects qualities that humans themselves value in the hunt: patience, intelligence, and deep awareness of the land. Beyond the Arctic, the Amorok has drifted into other worlds, into art, literature, and popular media, where it often becomes a generic beast of prey or a fantasy guardian. Yet the deeper truth of the Amorok cannot be entirely captured by these new interpretations, because its meaning is tied to the landscape and way of life from which it came. To truly understand the Amorok is to understand the cold, the endless sky, the sound of wind on ice, and the knowledge that you are a small figure in a vast, indifferent world. In the end, the Amorok is a kind of mirror. For the careless, it reflects the danger of overstepping one's limits. For the wise, it reflects the quiet pride of living in harmony with forces far stronger than oneself. And for all who hear its story, it reflects the enduring truth that survival is not only about strength, but about knowing when to move forward and when to turn back toward the light of the fire. The snow will fall again. The hunts will begin again. And somewhere on the lonely edges of the tundra, the Amorok will walk neither holy friend nor holy foe, but always a reminder that in the vast silence of the Arctic night, something larger than you is watching,